Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and the D's have rocketed back into the top three, recording our third 50-plus point victory in 4 matches, which apparently is the first time we've done this in our 165-year history. Joining me tonight to discuss our massive victory in the West is veteran Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening to Ben Man. Good evening to listeners. And speaking about the West, we're lucky to have Andy here tonight, in case listeners aren't aware. He's been blown from one side of the country out west and has finished up in the Gold Coast tonight. So we're lucky that we're actually on the air tonight.
Well, apologies for the late podcast. As George said, I was travelling to Broome, fresh off the victory in the West, only to find out that we were flying right into the heart of a Category 4 cyclone, the worst cyclone that WA has seen in over a decade. And I heard some of the staff at the hotel we were staying at talking about possible evacuation plans, and I was like, nah, I'm getting out of here. So we managed to get the last seats on the last plane out on Monday night. We headed back to Perth, and now we're on the East Coast in sunny Queensland, and I got in late last night, so I was never going to make it to a microphone in time for our already rescheduled show as a result of the public holiday. But better late or safe than never, so here we are. And also joining us to dissect our demolition of the Eagles is B-Man. Good evening, B-Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And ironic, Andy, that you were swept away from Broome.
Yes, that's a good one. Didn't think of that one. I should have. I'm a dad as well, so that's a perfect dad joke. So I'll use that one.
Try the fish. I'll be here all week.
Well, we asked our listeners to provide 5-star reviews, leave comments on Apple Podcasts or wherever they get their podcasts, and would then read them out on the show. So go take a moment now, pause, go write your 5-star review, and come back. So thanks. Yep, you're back. You've written it. Dan Andy 87 writes, love the in-depth analysis and the passion for the Ds that always comes through. Great to look forward to the boys unpacking a big win and also helping to make sense of a demoralising loss. Keep up the good work. Thanks. Thank you, Dan. And amazingly, we have another review/poem made just for us. Asdrubal writes, in Melbourne town, the colours red and blue are worn with pride by a team so true. The Melbourne Demons, they take the field, and with their skill and might, they will not yield. We supporters are true, whether it's rainy or blowy. Well, an exception round the time it's being snowy. But we need to know what's what and who's who, so we don't call out, well played, number 2. So now with a podcast called Demonland, 3 presenters educate us with mic in hand. Andy, B-Man, George will gloat or grieve. The tactics kicking to the pocket and loading, well, some believe. They speak of the women's game with such admiration and celebrate the sport with pure dedication. For Aussie Rules is more than just a game. It's a passion, our religion and Melbourne's fame. So let us cheer for the Demons loud and clear as they are the pride of Melbourne year after year. And may Demonland continue to inspire and keep the love of footy forever on fire. Go D's, go Redlegs, go the Mighty Fuchsias. Well, thank you so much, Asdrubal. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. That's fantastic. Now, that's some 5-star review. I think we might have a new high bar and a new preferred format for all reviews that come in. Just write a poem or just a couple of nice words and 5 stars. You write it, we'll read it and give it a shout out on the podcast. And if you would like to join us on the show tonight to talk about any of the topics that we're going to be talking about, then please give us a call on 039016 3666. That's 039016 3666. I'll answer, put you on mute, bring you on when we can. And during the week, you can call that number, leave us a message, and we'll play it on the show. We have a voicemail to play a bit later on from a long-time Demonlander, so you'll hear that during the listeners' questions section of the show. If you're listening live, join us in the chat room. Head over to demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday at 8:30. possibly Tuesday next week, because I will be flying back from Adelaide on Monday. So I might not have time to do some notes for the show, but we'll play that by ear. If you want to listen to us live, join us on Mondays, Tuesday next week maybe, at 8:30 p.m. at demonland.com. Guys, we'll just get into a quick match wrap-up. I'll keep it brief because we're probably closer to next week's match than this week's. I made the pilgrimage over the West, brimming with confidence for the first time in all of my travels across the Nullarbor to watch footy in Perth. I actually have a pretty good record over there, 3 wins from 4 matches. In fact, the D's have the greatest winning percentage of any team to play at Optus Stadium, which is our home away from home. The D's have a 70% win rate there, having won 7 out of our 10 matches, including the 2021 Grand Final. The Eagles only have a 60% win rate, followed by the Dockers 58%. Sydney are the next best with 57%, followed by Collingwood 56%. And GWS bring up the rear with 11% win rate, only having won once out of their 9 matches there. And my confidence never really wavered, despite a bit of fighting spirit shown by the injury-depleted home side and the home crowd that feel entitled to win a free kick for every single contest, disposal or tackle. And if they were to be gifted 20 frees directly in front of goal to win a match, there would not be the slightest pang of guilt that the win may have been undeserved. And I love a boo of the umpires as much as the next guy. But our friends in the West have made this an art form, and I would love it if the Ds were blessed with a run that some interstate teams get from umpires most weeks when they're at home. But even I can concede when we've given away a free kick or didn't deserve one, but not so these sand gropers. You might have heard the boos on the TV, but it was some of the individual comments at the game that was, that I heard in the stands that's worth the price of admission alone. Every Oliver handball's a throw, every tackle was ball, and on and on and on it went. The clear standout for the Ds were our midfielders. In the absence of Max Gawn, Brodie Grundy has fast-tracked his synergy with the on-ballers, dishing them out some silver service. Brodie's 33 hit-outs with 13 to advantage contributed to Oliver and Petraka's 34 and 29 possessions respectively, and Track had those 3 goals as well. Oliver was the king of the midfield with 34 possessions, 18 contested, 10 clearances, 10 tackles and 10 score involvement. And Clary is the equal leader in the competition for tackles with 33 tackles in 4 rounds. And speaking of tackling, after round 4, the Ds are leading the competition in total tackles and total tackles inside 50. Last year, we were 14th in the league for tackles, averaging 56.5 a game. In our premiership year, we were number 1, averaging 62.2. So far, we're averaging 64.3, so that's 2 tackles extra a match than 2021. And despite missing 2 games, Cozzy leads the Ds for tackles inside 50 with 9, followed by Spargo and Oliver on 7 each. Our forward line has not skipped a beat, despite not being settled in terms of players coming in and out in just the 4 rounds. The Ds have scored 11 more goals than their nearest competitor, having kicked 70 for the season to date, ahead of Collingwood on 59. Our opponents next week, Essendon are 3rd with 57 goals. 4 goals to T-Mac on his return to the side that was missing Ben Brown. 3 goals to Fritter, who has now kicked goals in his last 32 matches for the Ds. 2 goals to Van Ruin and 2 goals 5 to Cozzy. You can't ask much more from that from our forwards. The other big takeaway from the match was our versatility all over the field. Trent Rivers was superb in the middle and off half-back, 27 disposals in front of his home state. Petty played forward and back, and we'll talk more about Harry Petty a bit later on as there's some questions relating to where he's better suited in the team. Cozzy Pickett in the middle and up forward continues to be a headache for oppositions. And then there's our use of all of JVR, T-Mac and Petty as backup ruckman, and the versatility of the team really begins to shine. So it was another successful trip out west for the team, and for me personally, I'll be heading to Adelaide for the gather round next weekend, and I'd like to make amends for my last trip to Adelaide Oval in the controversial 1-point loss game in our premiership season. Hopefully the Port Adelaide fans that are at the ground awaiting their match in the doubleheader, well, let's hope they don't boo too loudly. Guys, do you have any general stuff you want to talk about before we move on?
I thought it was a really, really good win, and I mean, it's tricky coming up against a team that you're expected to win. It's, I'm still getting used to that feeling after, a lifetime of following footy and following Melbourne and not having that feeling all that often, I have to say.
When have we ever gone to West Coast and thought we are going to win the match? I don't think ever. maybe last year.
I've got there's some impressive stats you just reeled off then, and I've got a couple to chuck into the mix. That's our highest score against them since round 4, 2002. So
what happened in 2002? Where did they finish down the bottom that year? I would imagine.
I don't know. You're testing me now. Yeah, like, I can't remember where I just know that's and
it doesn't happen often.
And we scored 10 goals, 969 from forward half launches, which is our second best result since our premiership season in 2021. So lots of positives. But I really was, to be honest, quite impressed with the Eagles and their intent and their tackling pressure was fantastic. The Eagles, yeah. I thought the Eagles really brought it. They really brought intensity. It was pretty inevitable that they'd fall away given they had so many young players, and it's a good example of the importance of running on top of the ground. You could see they just ran out of gas. So I thought it was a really good win. They matched us. We only ended up with 20 more contested possessions than them, which it wasn't really an indication of us being down. I didn't think. I thought we played really, really well. We weren't as sharp, and we'll probably talk about that through the game. But I just think as a general comment that psychologically, you have to be on song to be super sharp. That's really hard week in, week out. Like it's a really clear pattern. The leading teams when they play the lower teams, that sort of phenomena of falling down to their level a little bit. So that that was, I think psychologically you can't stay at that cutting on the edge all of the time. So, but the bottom line is we won by 10, 11 goals. And, I know I talk about this a bit, but the line in the betting markets is really the most accurate predictor of the probable outcome of a match. And the line in that match was 42 points. So we smashed through the line that the bookies set. It was impressive performance from the D's, and they really love that ground, as you suggest, Andy.
It was interesting, Andy. The comparisons almost between our game and the Geelong Hawthorn game, where you had two teams which were Geelong premiers last year, but coming up against Hawthorn, who was down the bottom. How terrible that is! But it was a similar sort of game. Hawthorn got off to a flyer, and the same way the Eagles were really pushing us as hard as they could and really going in at every opportunity with contested ball. I think the tackles were 79 to us and 68 to them. Shows you how tough and fierce the whole game was. And yet the cream rises to the top when it needs to, and same as in the Geelong game. I think Hawthorn kicked the first 3 or 4 goals, and that was the last time they saw the goals until the last quarter. But it's just, there's no such thing as a team that's an absolute loser like there was in years gone by. Every team has its challenges and capabilities. And as Ben Man said, if you're not tuned on or you're off that little bit, you will suffer. But it was a really tough, hard game. And while we were expected to win, that's exactly what we did. And we came through when we needed to. And I think that'll put us in good stead for the coming games, but also after a really tough game against the Swans the previous week. It was good to see us come up again this week with the same sort of attitude.
And Goody sort of referenced that, didn't he? He talked about, the tackle numbers. Did you mention the tackle numbers, Andy?
Yeah. Well, I mentioned not the tackle numbers for the game, but just in we're leading, we're number one in tackles.
Yeah, well, I can't recall what the tackle numbers for this game was, but it would have
79 to 68.
Right, so our average wouldn't be, would probably only be 50, 60 tackles a game. So it was a lot of tackle. I mean, some of them we brought on ourselves because of the fumbles. That always creates a bit more, opportunity to tackle. But, we were, we played that game in the right sort of headspace in terms of physicality. Our skills were a bit off, so that, but nonetheless, as you mentioned, we've scored 70 goals this season, 11 goals more than everyone's, darlings in Collingwood, their scoring power. So, or maybe that was last week or even more this week. So, we're scoring. We did in this game, but it was another example, wasn't it, of how critical or how important it is to kick accurately. We've been fantastic with our accuracy. That we'll talk about that a bit later. But part of it is that we're playing more centrally, so we're having more shots from the corridor. I'm guessing that might not be right. That feels like that's how it looks to me. And there's a Twitter. You put up a few weeks ago, Andy, a Twitter some stats from Oliver Gigatz, I think, and he's. He calls himself, what does he say? Australian football researcher, stats, australianfootball.com, terrific Twitter site for stats. And he's got the accuracy, and this is manna from my heaven, shot at goal accuracy at the end of round 4 of the 2023 AFL season. Number 1 is the Mighty D's. We've had 117 shots at goal. We've kicked 70, 31, no score 16. 59.8, 5% ahead of the second team in Brisbane, who do go very centrally. They get a lot of their goals from the set shot corridors because they use the corridor. So, I wonder when, the last time we would have been the top of that particular table. Probably not for a long time. And again, it really put the Eagles under pressure because we took our chances, except for Cozzy, who 5 points is the most he's ever kicked, number of points in an AFL game, apparently.
Yeah, he really could have had, 5 or 6 goals for sure. Big man, you wanted to talk about pressure. You asked about the tackles before, and you said I did mention that we're averaging this year 64 tackles. Now, last year, throughout the whole year, it was 56, so it's 8 more a game so far than we were.
And then what did you say, 79 for the match just gone? So 15 more against a team that was on the bottom of the ladder, I think, or 17th before we played. So that's just good indication we went there with the right mindset and right attitude. So this week in the stats, wanted to just talk about pressure. I wrote this ahead of in reviewing or previewing the Lions Pies game. I predicted the Lions would win, and I said ahead of that game that the way to beat the Pies and the Swans, the way to beat their method is through intense pressure on the ball carrier, and combined with shutting off the corridor options. And shutting off the corridor options has a twofold effect. They can elect to continue to take the corridor on and turn it over more often, or don't take it on, and both teams lose their one wood. The D's did both of those things really, really well against the Swans. In terms of the pressure, we constantly harassed and pressured their key kickers, and as a result scored 6 goals from turnover. And in terms of the corridor stuff, we think about how often the Swans at halfback looked inboard for an option and even shaped a kick into the corridor, then changed their mind and went down the line instead. McMartin brothers probably did it 5 or 6 times between them, and Blakey as well quite often. And my thought was that the Lions would take a similar approach to the game against, how they went playing against the Pies, and that's how it turned out. That pressure was critical, and you could see, remarkably, I've got to hand it to Nick Dacos. He's a classy player, and I predicted in that same comment that they'd physically go after him, and they did, and Zorko was into him all night. But he still managed to. I think he got 36 kicks, and his disposal efficiency was off the charts, like 80%. So was Pendlebury. But outside those 2 players, McCreary and a whole bunch of other players, the pressure really got to them with that kick, and they turned it over a lot. And the Lions really sweated on it. And so I say that by way of just emphasising how important pressure is generally, but in particular to beat that model of fast ball movement and incisive kicking through to the corridor, high risk kicks into the corridor. And I've been noticing on the television coverage, both, I can't remember if it's 7, both of them, but they bang on a lot about the pressure gauge, and then they show it. You'll see that it's people now starting to 180 is the average, and that 200 is elite, and so I think it's really quite interesting. But what they don't explain is how to define it. Now, we had a short go at it last week, but I just thought it might be worth just, to help people understand how it's defined, because it is a really critical part of the game. And I think because it is, it's on the broadcast now, people are sort of, it's become ubiquitous almost. So, I thought it'd be worthwhile just giving a definition. And so I'll throw to you, Andy, just to give the champion data definition of pressure.
Well,
and how it's calculated as well.
Yeah, so the teams are assigned pressure points according to the pressure they apply to opposition disposals, one pressure act per disposal. So there's 0.775 for what's called set, which is after a mark or free kick without playing on. So I'm assuming that's just someone on the mark. That gets 0.75. 1 point is no pressure, not close enough to rush the ball carrier. 1.2 is corralling, guarding space but not approaching. 1.5 points is chasing, gaining from behind or forcing a rush disposal. 2.25 is closing in an area and approaching the ball carrier. 3.75 is physical, making contact before disposal. And then it says teams also get acts and points for preventing opposition disposal by tackling, which is physical, or smothering is classed as closing. Pressure factor is the average points per 100 pressure acts, and they've got it as a sum, the sum of pressure points times 100 over the sum of pressure acts. So that's how they get to it. You can go to Champion Data and find their July 31, 2020 post, and it sort of gives a couple of charts sort of about it. So, yeah, go look that up.
So, and it is a critical. I mean, all the best teams rely on pressure. Like, you're not going to win a flag or a final under pressure. You hear, the good way to think about it is when you hear someone describe a game as it's finals like pressure. You can see the difference when a team really ramps up the pressure as to when they don't. So you mentioned that Hawthorn Cats game, George. I watched a bit of the second half. I mean, if you're a Cats fan getting carried away with that game, like Hawks pressure just completely fell away. And when it does in AFL footy now, it almost looks like a different sport when two teams aren't applying the same level of pressure, and you get the sort of unpressured footy that Hawks were playing. You get the sort of blowout that happened. I don't know, they kicked 12 unanswered goals or something ridiculous, the Cats, and people might pump them up, but it was really because the Hawks' pressure just completely collapsed.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, and Geelong will have another easy one this week. They got West Coast coming up.
Well, hopefully they'll bring the sort of pressure and intensity that they brought against us. And, I wouldn't be totally shocked if, we'll see. But, of course, Cats will likely win that game. But they might get a rude shock if they bring the intensity that they did against us.
Or being a young, inexperienced team, they could just fold completely and not bring that pressure, and then Geelong will get a massive win. But anything else with your pressure? Otherwise, we'll get into listener questions.
Let's get into listener questions.
All right. Travi14 says, the game was hard to watch, but we did what we needed to overpower the Eagles. I think Petty showed that although he was drafted as a forward, he has lost all forward craft. He has no leading patterns and looks uncomfortable being in front in marking contests. He's fine to swing forward in games, but I don't think we can play him as a permanent forward. Agree, or should we persist with him? Murdoch 516 adds, Harrison Petty is a good player, so he will have games up forward that are really damaging and will make us want to persist with him up forward. But in my opinion, we need 3 talls and a mid-size option like Hibbert in our defensive 50, not 2 talls, 1 mid-size option and 3 smalls. Now, this is me talking. I like the idea of throwing Petty forward to pinch hit like we did in the finals last year, which was probably in that game a little too late. I thought he did okay last week against Sydney because he was providing a foil for our other forwards. And as we mentioned last week on the podcast, his marking and competing presence was needed with the intercepting Sydney defenders. This week, he did seem a little lost and he just wasn't clunking any marks. And you have to remember, he hasn't trained as a forward this year. He was sort of thrown down there in the absence of Brown and Gawn going down, so we weren't playing that Gawn Grundy resting in the forward line. And, we do stretch teams with an extra big man up forward, so we have needed him down there. Monocular, also on Petty, says, thanks, guys, as ever, for the informative and entertaining podcasts and written contributions. Whilst Harrison Petty doesn't seem to be setting the world on fire as a forward, I do see the advantages he offers as both a competitive and combative beast in the forward line and as the strongest and best backup ruck we have on the field at present. So until Max returns, I would keep him in his current role. He couldn't do the job from defence where he has space to fill an opponent to account for. But when Max returns, will Harry return to defence? I guess a lot will depend on who is performing both forward and back when that momentous moment arrives. Engorged Ungman, re Petty in the forward line, says, the last I saw on the match on TV was Petty's weirdly spilled mark, which Charlie Spargo mopped up for a goal. Question, was that scenario emblematic of Petty in the forward line? He's a bit out of touch for a class act. Keep pursuing it and it will come, question mark. What is his specific role, do we think, 2 weeks in? Is it to take an intercept defender / big body to allow T-Mac and JVR some more room to run their lanes? Thus he is the unheralded, unglamorous and therefore seemingly much maligned. Or is it something else altogether? Thoughts, please. George, what are your thoughts on Petty as forward? I imagine he's just being there to pinch hit while Gorney's not there.
I think people forget why Petty's there in the first place. It's Gawn went down, and in the Brisbane game after he went down, Petty went forward so that he could release in that game T-Mac into the ruck. We've still got the same problem. You need that backup ruck, be it Van Rooyen or T-Mac or Petty in even for one occasion this round, and then you can't finish up in the situation where you're robbing your forward line. So you need that extra body up there. We've been fortunate that Petty hasn't been needed down in the last couple of games down back. I think things might change this week a little bit, but we'll talk about that later on. The other thing to forget that's easy to forget when people look at this game is that Hearn and Barras are very, very good defenders. And if you've got a Petty down there taking one of them, that releases the Van Rooyen to be able to do what he needs to be doing. You don't want a 19-year-old kid being hit by someone like Shannon Hearn from behind. So it fills that role as well. As to his dropped mark, that was an easy one, and I invite people to go and have a look at the replay again. It's when he transitioned from being in broad sunlight into the shadows that go across the ground. He missed it by miles, probably because he couldn't see it as he moved from, like I said, from one side to the other. So I wouldn't read anything into that whatsoever. But Petty's down there because he needs to be down there at the moment. When we get the rucking situation a little bit more clarified, or we come up against a side that's got a really strong forward line, I think you'll see Petty down the back where he's more needed. Might be even more exacerbated this week with Michael Hibberd being out. So we'll wait and see when we get to the discussion about the ins and outs and how the teams will line up later on.
I agree, George. I mean, Goody's preference is for a 3 tall forward. So 2 genuine talls, Ben Brown, Tom McDonald, and the resting ruckman. JVR, is essentially playing the Jackson role from last year at the moment because the second ruckman with Grundy playing the main ruck. I know that JVR they're sharing the ruck duties, but just you can think of it like that. So he's like a sort of a third tall forward. Petty's playing, this last weekend gone, Brown's role. Not exactly the same role, of course, as Ben Brown. He's doing a bit of defensive forward, exactly as you say, George, because he did a similar role last week on both McCartans, really, but in particular, I always forget, what's Paddy's brother's name? Tom, is it?
Tom McCartan?
Tom.
Yeah.
Tom, yeah. So mainly on Tom McCartan, and he did a similar thing and, down back, so he plays that defensive forward role, but, Goody's setup is 3 tall forwards. And so exactly as I say, George, we needed another tall. Who's it going to be? It's Petty. I don't think there's any doubt that he'll go back. It may not be this week because I don't think we'll again, we'll talk about it later, but I don't think Brown will come in this week. It's going to be wet. Wiedemann's out for them. So we probably won't be stretched too much defensively. So we can probably, we don't need a third tall probably defensively. I don't think they'll risk Brown. So Petty will probably get another week. But I think after that, back on the dry deck, hope Brown will come back in, T-Mac, Brown, and JVR. The big question, and Petty goes back into defence, and he's exactly as I say, and he's not a natural forward because he doesn't train there. He's an future All-Australian defender. That's where he'll go back to. But I think it's great. It's great that they're being flexible and using him, because I'm sure Goody would be thinking there'll be a time when we may have to play him there, or we'll use him like we have with T-Mac. And we'll swing him forward. What I found interesting on the weekend, and it was great for T-Mac, is that T-Mac essentially played as a true full forward. So Petty did some of the running that T-Mac would normally do when Brown's in the team, and it's been Brown who's been playing out of the square when it's T-Mac and Brown. Not that it's only happened once, I guess, but and he looked like a renewed player, T-Mac, not having to do so much donkey work running up and down the ground. JVR did a lot of that as well, and he got his goals from directly in front, and did a good job kicking them, T-Mac. So that's how I see it going with the forward setup, but in particular with Petty.
Well, I'll bring these questions that we had a bit later on forward now, because we are talking about the forward line and what the ultimate setup is going to look like. D for Life says, gents, you do a great job with the podcast. Thanks for terrific listening. How do you see our optimal forward line working by season's end? And similarly, how do you see won't talk about the back line. He's asked about that. D-Me adds, been a long time listener to the pod since the time of Grapeviney. You guys are to be congratulated. The best analysis of the D's games available. How do you think we will balance the old with the future in our forward line? I think we need to give our continuity to JVR, while Jefferson has been strong in the twos, although he's more of a project for next year. Shaki has been good as well, and he's only 26, I think. T-Mac and BBB complicate things by also putting in good performances, even though injury clouds hover over both. And boys, this has been the age-old question about our forward line. It seems to be a week-to-week proposition at the moment, particularly with Gawn going down, throwing a spanner in the works of the Gawn-Grundy resting forward tactic. T-Mac and Brown will need to be managed. What's the best makeup for this dangerous forward line that every pundit in the pre-season had written off as being our weakest link? Now, despite us being 11 goals ahead of the nearest team and having played quality opposition, albeit this week, but in the previous weeks, we probably had the hardest draw out of any of the teams.
Yeah.
How do you see our forward line going?
Goody's preferred setup is three talls. It's funny because this same conversation was happening in the first half of the season in 21, and then again, what's our best setup, blah, 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 all of that stuff. But if you look at the history of Goody's in the last couple of years, he definitely likes three talls. The question for me, George, is, I don't think Shaki will be brought in. Jefferson definitely not this year. He's definitely a project player. Shaki might get a crack, but only if needed, because we need a third tall. The big question for me is what happens when Max comes back. And I saw on the injury list today on Demon Land, 1 to 2 weeks. It's like, settle down. But let's say in a couple of weeks' time, let's say 3 weeks' time, he comes back, and Ben Brown is in the team. Someone's going to have to come out of that forward line.
If we've got a fit Ben Brown, a fit T-Mac, you got JVR there. Petty obviously goes back to the back line.
It might be that they end up
4 into 3.
It'll be really interesting to see, and again, there's probably touches on a question later, but this notion of how they use the squad and the squad mentality, that it was really interesting. I thought that Goody emphasised that question in relation to Hibbo and about whether he might play and where his Achilles was at post-pressure. He mentioned that we're taking a squad mentality, and for me, that's on a separate sort of conversation. That's a really good indication of a good organisation. They did a review, a standard review, wasn't a special one. They identified things that they could have done better, much to I'm sure lots of Demon Landers, including yourself, Andy, who were critical last year, and George too, I guess, too, about us not using different players and not using the full squad. Would have been great to hear his emphasis on that squad mentality. That's a learning they've taken from last year and they've brought into this year. And I suspect, this is just a gut feeling, is that they will rotate Ben Brown and T-Mac a little bit. I'm not sure about you, George. What do you think about how they'll use those tools?
I think that is absolutely the way that we'll see it. And so there won't be an optimal forward line as such for us. That both Ben Brown and T-Mac have got physical problems that we're all well and truly aware of. I can't see them, for example, playing Ben Brown for any more than 3 to 4 games in a row. You're just putting him at huge amounts of risk. So, like you for this week, I don't think that we will play him. It's a 6-day turnaround. You can give him a good break the next time, and then he's right to roll. Especially when you've got T-Mac in good form and Van Rooyen proving his as well. But I think it'll be rotation. Even when Max comes back, it'll be rotation.
Yeah, I reckon.
And just to worry people, Van Rooyen was carrying a knee bandage this week that appeared that wasn't there last week. So if he's strained at training in some way, which it looks like to me from the outside, then he might find himself as part of the same rotations as well. We don't want to see these critical tools in our forward line getting injured simply because we're playing them too much. And the other thing about the forward line is we forget too easily about Fritsch and Cozzy in there as well, and Spargo.
Yeah.
They're just as critical to the whole forward line structures, and at least they don't have the same sort of injury clouds that are hanging over them. Let's forget about the suspension clouds. But I think we're going to see more of the rotations between these three. So don't expect to see the same 3 or 2 or 3 tools there week after week. It's going to be a bit of a rotational, and when Max comes back, Max will drop down. The other option we've got with one of those tools is, particularly someone like a T-Mac, if he is up and fit and running, you can use him as a sub because he's available. Yeah. So,
but I don't think I reckon that it's an interesting question, the sub, but I think they like the medium. I mean, you've just got more flexibility, haven't you?
Yeah.
On that, I mean, I agree, George, with that rotate, and that brings Shaki into the frame for some matches, I think. So, there might be occasions when they bring him in to get his sort of, get him his debut for Melbourne out of the way, to come in as a tall forward and to play that role. He's playing a pure full forward role at Casey. I think he's got a shot at coming in for that reason and, role players through there. But I think the key thing is that Goody will pretty much always run 3 tall forwards. Yeah. And his preference is 3 tall defenders. And May was asked about whether he wants Petty to come back, and he was mucking around, but the short answer is yes. He's a defender. He's got to get back there and do his job. That May doesn't want to be left and leave it with all of the work down there. So, I think that's exactly right, George. I think they're more likely to keep a settled defense than, and they'll role players and maybe even role players through different positions up forward. Like I said, like Tommy Mack, he would have loved it coming out of the square, playing actually how he plays when he played for Casey. That was a position he played almost like a true old school full forward that leads from the square and out, and then JVR a few times too. And as I say, that might give Shaki a shot at some stage for 2 or 3 games. And, I thought they obviously will have to manage BB. I think they've said that, haven't they? Last year with his knee, that it's a degenerative thing, so he's going to have that forever. And T-Mac, I thought they handled him brilliantly. We talked last week about the attitude that he went back to the 2s in, and Goody mentioned that. That was a big factor in his selection. And, I thought the attitude that he brought into the game last week, it was terrific to see him do so well, and terrific to see him clunk his marks as well. And
kick straight as an arrow.
And kick straight. I mean, we had, I forget the contested mark numbers, but after the first 2 matches, we'd only had 2 contested marks. I think it was 7 or something against Brisbane, and I'm not sure what it was in this game, but it, felt like some 10 contested marks at least.
El Diablo 14 writes, can we discuss who has had the most underwhelming start of the season? I'm starting to worry about Angus Brayshaw. Not sure if the issue is where he's playing or something else. On the other hand, JVR, McVie and JJ have been great additions to the team. Demonic Final Fantasy agrees, saying agreed that he is sliding slowly down the list of best 23 and has been for a while. While his performances are okay, his impact is becoming his impact is becoming less. A niggle, something isn't quite right. Murdoch 516 disagrees, saying, what's underwhelming to you about his season so far? Don't just say he's underwhelming and not provide something to actually critique. Per my comment in response to Travie 14 about Petty, our defensive 50 looks weirdly out of shape due to the rotation of Petty forward. I think Brayshaw is a victim of this, and as he's being asked to man a mid-size or a tall key forward at times. Aside from that, I think he offers a hard head and composure to our defensive 50, which helps us lock the ball in our forward half. RPFC also disagrees with El Diablo, saying, we're in a good spot and it's only a month of footy. Cool your jets on Angus. He's our best ute and we're playing him in the back line, which is fine. His kicking is all duck or no dinner when he gets us going through the middle. Not everyone is going to be firing on all cylinders, and he is a proven player. He may bite off a bit, but our new game plan demands someone bite off something down back to get us going down the corridor, through the corridor. May rarely does, Lever never does, Petty, Nup, Rivers is increasingly ahead of the footy, Salem's injured, Hibberd prefers down the line, and Bowie needs someone else to try and get us going. So guys, Angus is El Diablo's a bit critical of Angus. I don't really see a problem. I don't think he's playing at his best, but I don't think he's a problem. George?
No, I don't think he's a problem at all. I think from Angus's perspective, he's a bit more unnoticed these days, and I think that's got to do with the arrival of Hunter at the club. He's pushed Angus to areas where he's not normally seen as much. But if there was ever a reliable player down back, and I think this week we'll see even more of Angus in the absence of Hibberd down back. So he's that last man holding the defensive line quite often, and you go, thank goodness for Angus Brayshaw being right there. But just because you don't see him running up and down the ground as much and getting as much of the ball, he's not playing in the midfield as much these days, of course, so you don't see him. You don't notice the work that he's doing. But no problems about what Angus is providing to the side.
Yeah, I mean, I basically can't agree at all. I think he's been excellent again this year. I think I've talked about this with my, my nibbler hat on a few times, and same with Spargo, is that Goody has specific roles. All players have a specific role. It can be really difficult to assess players just on their numbers, I think, particularly for those players with a really clearly defined role. I'm really, really happy with the role that Angus has got this year. I didn't like him in the midfield last year. I think that his weaknesses are exposed more as a midfielder, particularly his disposal, and also his lack of pace. He's not particularly quick. But there was a moment in the game that summed up why I love him back. We completely got caught out on a turnover. And I'm not sure, but it would have been good to see at the ground, because it was one of those things where he suddenly came into shot, but he read the ball so well and ran back because we're all out of position. Diagonally sort of came across and intercept marked 30, 40 metres out from their goal. If he hadn't have done that, it was a goal to them for sure. And it was just a beautiful bit of reading of the play, which is his skill. He's so good defensively. Remember in 2000, the first 3 quarters of last season, he was by far and away in the AFL the most intercept marks of anyone. And that's where I think he's most beneficial to our team. He has his biggest impact in that role, playing down as that sort of defensive mop up, get in the right spot, intercept marked. It's really important that he can kick so well on both feet coming from the back line. That's more important from coming from half back than it is really is if he's playing as a mid or playing forward of the centre, because it means that he can choose. He's got lanes to choose from with his left or right foot, and he uses them really well. It means he also can kick 50 metres, and it's less impactful if he turns it over than if he's kicking 20 or 30 metres. And in this game just gone, there's Demon Dynasty. It puts up on the stats file thread on Demonland. It's a terrific, and I apologise, I'm not sure how this is the player ratings or it's his own calculations? And did you know on that whether it's his own?
I do not.
But he ranks the players collectively and aggregates them over for each game and then over, as the season goes. And in the game just gone, Oliver was ranked number 1, not surprisingly, 6.2 rating. Trent Rivers was second, great game. Jack Viney was third, and there's a question about him later, which is in the similar sort of vein as this. Petrarca was fourth, and the next one was Neil Bullen, another role player who gets maligned, and then Angus Brayshaw. So Angus and then Tommy Mack. But so Angus Brayshaw on these rankings was the 1, 2, 3, 4, the 6th best player on the field. And that's what it looked like to me. I think he's a hugely important player for Melbourne, and I love him in that role down back. And I hope he stays there all season.
No disrespect to, and Kieran, we'll get to you in 1 second. We'll go to have a caller. No disrespect to any posters or supporters who sort of criticise certain players because maybe they're not flashy and kicking goals and running and taking bounces going down the wing. There are role players at clubs, as B-Man, you've pointed out many times, and they're just as important to the team, even if they're not being flashy. So,
But I think, I think there's a risk with the phrase role players, used as a pejorative, and that's how Nibbler has been. He's just a role player. It's every player's got a role. Yes, every single player in the team, but particularly in Goodwin's system. It's a system that requires complete buy-in by every single player to do the job that they've been told to do. So they're all role players. And his role is to be a defensive player that gets back and intercepts, which is critical at the moment because our best defender is off injured. Salo that's the role he plays. They don't play exactly the same role, but he is in our best defensive unit, Brayshaw. So I just bristle a bit at the sort of dismissing players because they're a role player. There isn't really any. A player like back in the day, a tagger might have been a role player, and so fair enough. That's you could say that he's just a tagger, but I think that everyone's got a role. It's just the challenge. I think is from a fan's perspective is we don't know what the roles are. We don't know what we can see now what Nibbler's role. We can see what Spargo's role is. We can see what Hunter's role is. But we don't necessarily know. It's a bit more difficult to see what Brayshaw's role is because you can't really tell, where is he? It's the same with Sparrow. Like the criticism Sparrow sometimes gets. He had a great game, but I think he's got specific tasks or things he has to do. But we don't know the metrics. We don't know the key performance indicators that the club gives them. But what we do know is they're not in the team unless they're doing their job. They're not in the team. We've talked about this. We've got the best team we've had in the whole time I've ever followed Melbourne Footy Club. You're not in that team unless you're performing the task that you've been asked to perform.
I always said there'll come a day where we come good and people will find something to complain about, and I think we're seeing that now. On the line, our good friend Kieran from Canberra. Kieran, how you going?
Good evening, gentlemen. How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. Thank you.
Good evening, Kieran.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for taking the call, guys. I listened to that last 7 minutes and, well said, really well said. And just to pick up on what you were saying, Alex Neil-Bullen's played 132 games. He's only 27 and he's getting better, I think. He could be a 200, 250 gamer. And he's the kind of bloke we need in that forward line as a leader. I think we're lacking a little bit of leadership up the front. We've got the leaders everywhere else on the field, but he's so integral, I believe, in that forward line to provide the leadership when we need it. I just wanted to call about the Salem factor and whether he could become our Grundy. I think he's one of our best players in the history of the club. I think he's incredible, silky and all of that. But whether we get to a position where we can't afford him and we need to afford other players. I was just interested in your thoughts on that, noting I need you to know how much I love him, but I'm wondering how we're going to pay for all these incredible blokes that we've got on the list. Hopefully they'll do a Geelong and take a pay cut, but I was just watching the team. As you said, Bin Man, it's the best in our lifetime. I don't think there'd be much argument about that. But how are we going to afford them keep going forward? Be interested in your thoughts on that.
George, do you have any? What's Salo's contract status at the moment?
I'd have to look that up.
Oh, he's
Go ahead, Kieran.
he's re-signed last year, I think, George, didn't he, for another 6 years or so. And I'd imagine it'd be a fairly decent packet because he's an incredible player.
So are you suggesting we offload him to another club? If we need
I'm worried
the
that
dollars,
Yeah, I'm worried where we're going to get those dollars. And I'd just be interested because of the analysis you guys have and the insight. It would be terrible to lose him. But how do we pay for the Sparrows and the Bowies and all of these guys? I'm just interested to hear your thoughts. And I know it's a question on notice, so it may not be the right time. But yeah, be really interested in your thoughts.
One thought I've got, George, I mean, you're more attuned to this stuff, so it's definitely a challenge for any super successful club. I mean, not that we're super successful, let's get, but for any team that is loaded with us with talent, it's a huge challenge. But, I'm not really super across the sort of contractual stuff. But what I would say is there must be a huge benefit for the club as well in having long-term contracts, because they can back end them and they can use so they've got 6 years with Salem. I think, didn't Brayshaw sign also a 5 or 6 year contract? You've got Oliver and Track both on long-term contracts. I think Max is locked in. You can spread that big money across multiple years. And I know that's how some of the other, like Geelong have done that. Brisbane in their heyday, they would look to do that. I mean, it gives them a little bit of flexibility with those big contracts. It probably helps a little bit. You're getting younger players coming through as well. We've got a middle of the table age range team at the moment. So maybe that balances out a bit. What do you think, George?
I think the best thing that we have done is get these long-term contracts in place for our highly talented players. And as Bin Man said, you can back end it. The problem with the back ending occurs at the back end when you run out of.
Hopefully that's outside our premiership window.
That's exactly right. And that's exactly what has happened to a couple of teams. Clubs like Hawthorn post their heydays. Collingwood ran into the same problem, handing out money left, right, and centre and back ending, hoping they get there. The other thing that's in our favour is that. For the CBA this year, which still hasn't been signed off. I can't give Gil McLaughlin any plaudits for anything like that. They've already said that there's a 5% increase across the board in any case before they sign off on this regardless. So the salary cap is increasing slightly, so that's helpful. I would hate to lose someone like Salem, and he is contracted. People forget the contracts. We're more likely to lose those sort of players who are at the fringe,
exactly.
who are highly capable.
Like a Jimmy Jordan or
a Chandler or someone like that. Those are the ones that we're more likely to lose. It happened to Richmond when they lost Ellis and Butler and a couple of others, I think, out of their premiership sides, just trying to keep the rest of the talent in the side, but they're always fringe players. So I'm not worried about losing someone like Christian Salem. I just hope his body holds up because he was out for long periods last year, and the same thing this year.
And when he came back last year, he just wasn't the same as he was in 2021.
Yeah.
Now, coming out of contract at the end of this year, we've got Chandler, Dunstan, Hibbard, Jordan, Cozzy, Neil Bullen, Melksham, Rivers, Shaki, and Wowie. And then next year we've got Bowie, Brown, Harms, Hunter, Matt Jefferson, Langdon, Laurie, Lever, McDonald, Smith, Sparrow, and Tomlinson. So there's next 2 years. There's a lot of names that in there that we do want to be keeping in the team. So I can't see us being able to keep everyone as well as bringing in, trading in talent from other clubs, and
But I think they've done a good job. Like that's one of the important parts of a well-run footy club, obviously. Like, you don't do well on field unless you've got your stuff sorted off field. And I think, we have to acknowledge how well Perth's done, how well the whole team's done off field in terms of, balancing not just the salary, but also and managing the salary cap, but the age demographic. As I said, we're middle table for the average age on our list. So Geelong being number one, and Saints are right up there as well. So I'd be more worried about those clubs in terms of their situation. But you get players, I think the situation with Grundy was a bit different. It was that they made some pretty bad errors in terms of, how they structured their payments. And I'm guessing that they didn't, that they were looking elsewhere in terms of their thinking about maybe more running player in Cameron than Grundy, although...
I bet they wish they had Grundy now.
So I think that was a function of them stuffing up, basically, rather than it being a structured plan. So I think that, those long-term contracts, as George said, gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of managing, because they've squared away their high salary players, the top 4 or 5 players. So...
Anything else, Kieran?
Thank you, gentlemen, and wish me luck. I have my wife and I are 10 years married tomorrow, and she's a Bomber, and so it's always a big week. I managed to get 2 of our 3 boys as Demons, but ironically, the Bomber, he was the one who stayed up the latest to watch the grand final 2021 with me. So
wow.
it's a big week in the Phillips household, gents. So thank you.
Well, you're on a hiding to nothing, because if you cheer too much, you'll get whacked. And if but you can't be patronising. You go, oh, look, those Bombers are doing well this year. It's like either
you have clearly lived the game. You've been man. You've clearly lived the game, been man, and still married. So that's good. I could take the tips from you.
Well,
all right,
you
then,
can
thank
also
you very
poor
much.
old Sammy Whedon's out as well. So
yeah, that's my son's favourite player. My Bomber's son's favourite player. So, yeah.
All right. Well, best of luck.
Brilliant.
Congratulations. And, let's go Demons. Thanks, Kieran.
Absolutely. Go Red Legs. See ya.
go D's.
That was Kieran from Canberra. Always good to hear from him. Gaundy the Great asked, can we discuss the non-goal at the end of the game where the ball appears to have crossed the line but not the back of the padding? Seems to have completely missed the media watch, which someone would have picked up on by now, but they obviously didn't. In my book, that was definitely a goal. I think the ARC guy probably had a prior engagement, wanted to get out of there really quickly, because I don't think they spent enough time on that. Those missed points can cost you a place in the finals or the top 4 or the top 2. And just because a team's up by 60 points, it doesn't mean you can rush something like that. That can have implications on a team's year. I bet you that if we were down by 4 points, they would have looked at it for a little bit longer than they did and made sure. There should be no difference between 60 points and 4 points. What do you think, guys? Definitely, if there would have been 4 points in it, they would have had a much, much longer look at it.
I was surprised at the speed that they did look at it, but unfortunately, I think some pictures have been put up which don't show the correct outcome. Lazy in the site on page 16. Yeah, page 16 of the post-match.
I didn't see that.
Shows a picture which is very clearly indicating that it was touched.
Oh, that it was touched.
Was that according to Whispering Jack?
No, because Whispering Jack's photo is probably 2 frames later.
Fake news.
So were they saying it was touched, or they were saying okay, all right.
It's definitely touched on the picture that Lazy put up. And you can see it on where the position of the hands there was one of the Eagles players in the goal square, where his hands moved from one picture to the other. So you know that the picture that Whispering Jack put up is probably 1 to 2 frames later, but it's too late at that point.
What page did you say that was on? Sorry,
16.
16. Okay.
16.
But the other factor too is that even if they had reviewed it, if it was called a goal, it has to be like there can't be any doubt. And so even if that's between the 2 photos, it is actually a goal. There's enough doubt there to once the goal umpire's called it a goal, not to overturn it.
Yeah.
I don't even know. I don't know. Is it the padding or is it the line? That's the key.
The padding is in front of the line.
Is the padding over the line? No.
No, the padding is in front of the line.
Okay. All right.
But on a tangential point, is that the kick that was not a goal up in Sydney in the end of that Port Sydney game, it was doing my head in the camera. I don't know what Channel 7 are doing. It's like they've suddenly gone all 60s flashback acid or something, because they're doing all these super close sort of shots of play and lots of down on the ground shots and in the crowd and all of these weird shots. And on that particular one, and same as our goal, is that you couldn't, in the angle shot, they didn't have the full shot of the goal, and they didn't even replay it properly until afterwards. So I reckon that played into the how that was viewed, because the commentators aren't at the ground. They're watching the television screen in a studio. And so the camera angle they would have had was foreshortened, and it cut straight away to Flory, whatever his name is, celebrating. And a similar thing happened in the Eagles game, because it was at the end of the game. So the camera swung away from it.
Delightful Play asks, would love to hear your thoughts about Rivers playing some time in the midfield and Clary having a few minutes in half back. Rivers has had a great start to the season, it seems to me. Red and Blue make purple adds without trawling through statistics. Rivers seems to be taking more intercepts marks. Has he gotten better, or are we just playing against some dodgy forward lines? Your thoughts on Rivers, guys?
Yeah, I think he was fantastic in this day. And if you listen to the interview of Uze after the game, he was very, very complimentary of him, and particularly in the time that he spent in the midfield as well. So I think this is another one of Goodwin's, where people criticise him for not making changes. You might find that Trent Rivers by the end of the season is playing a lot more midfield time, and it gives us another option in and around the packs, around the ground as well. So, yeah, he was fantastic, reads the ball well, and as Uze said, has got a really deep kick. So when he kicks it forward, it goes well and truly forward and puts the defenders of the other side into real panic mode very, very quickly. So, a great game from him, and I hope he continues the way he's going. I hope his knee holds up as well.
He, like as you say, George, another thing that they took from last year, it's quite a big change in terms of the way that Goody's going about that centre. The players getting midfield minutes, is that he's been true to his word at the beginning of the season that they're going to roll more players through. Now, I don't think Rivers spent hardly any time in there last week, but against a lower team, we still went in with intensity, but they took the opportunity to give him much more time in the middle this week, and he was fantastic. And I mean, he looks like he's trimmed down a little bit. He looks a little less sort of stocky, and he's running over the ground super well. He was hampered right from the beginning of last season, as we talked about a few times, with that sort of calf strain or ham, leg thing he had. I think one of the things I really love about him is his 60-metre kicks. He clears such good distance. He gives them, that, and for a team that's all about territory, he's a big part of that ability to get territory. He was terrific, and I didn't hear those comments from Uze, but he's the midfield coach, so he's obviously been given a specific task this week, and he's really grabbed that opportunity. And again, it's gonna. I think Goody's has to be commended for addressing or improving, looking for areas to improve. And I'm sure that Goody's mindset is about, like you said, George, is sort of experimenting a little bit up forward, all with a view of the finals, all with the view of their best 22, and in being able to bring Rivers in to the as an extra weapon, if you like. Same with Cozzy, same with others. But I could see him definitely getting more minutes as an attacking midfielder, not really as a defensive midfielder like Captain Jack and Jack Viney, but as someone who can really get good damage with metres gained from gets the ball with the midfield. It's going to end up at the forward pocket in front of 20 metres out in front of goal, and he seems to be really enthusiastic and energised as well. So it's probably the other really good thing about giving those sort of players time in the midfield is gives them a chance to obviously play a different role, look at the game differently, skills and sort of enthusiasm to bring back to any other position he's playing.
He's one of those guys as well that I mentioned before that is out of contract at the end of this season. So I imagine both Western Australian teams will be knocking down his door.
And as you said, Andy, it's those sort of players that I'm more worried about than the Salems because suddenly he has a really good second half of the year and the Western Australian teams come calling and, maybe price us out of the market. They're the ones that you struggle to keep. And, I think that like JJ's another good example. If he doesn't get regular time, he walks into pretty much every other AFL team going, doesn't he?
We'll get to it when we get to it. Ross Millen says, great work on the podcast, guys. How did you view the experiment of rotating the second ruck positions across multiple players, as alluded to by Simon Goodwin in his press conference? We had JVR, we had T-Mac, we had Petty, all being second ruck to Grundy, giving him a chop out. And Grundy had a fantastic game, as we mentioned. And these guys sort of ably fit in. What do you think about that experiment, George?
Yep. Yeah, we're going to see for the next couple of weeks regardless. And we have to have an option, even coming up this week against Draper and Phillips, both very tall players. So we do need a reasonably good second ruck. But Grundy, I think, is working his way into the role. He basically didn't train to be the primary ruck. He was, in conjunction with Max, and now all of a sudden he's expected to take the whole lot. Well, that's not possible, firstly, but secondly, he does need some backup. So we're going to continue to see this happening for the next couple of weeks until Max comes back. But it's working magnificently. The other thing is injuries do happen during the year. Let's hope Grundy doesn't get injured at some point. He might need a rest. I don't know, particularly after taking the load for the period that Max is away. He might need to be rotated out, and we still need these secondary people ready to take up the role.
Bush Demon says, thanks for the great podcast. When Gorney comes back, how will things be different now that Grundy is showing his wares? And can Gorney and Van Rooyen interchange in the spearhead posse when Gorney's not rucking to free up JVR for a bit of a gallop? Anyone think of what's going to happen when Gorney returns? How's our ruck situation going to work? Where are they going to? Are we going to go back to the resting
I
rucks
reckon
in the
it's
forward
been
line?
a real positive of Maxi not playing is that it's allowed Grundy to play as a natural ruckman. George made this point a couple of times. He's a different type of ruck to Max, but he's running like it was fantastic to see him.
He's a ruck rover.
He's like as I said last week. He's very much in some ways like people talked about Jackson. He could almost be a midfielder. He could he's not as quick and as athletic as Jackson, but at the moment, who would you rather have? Honestly, I'm not bagging Jackson, he does all of the things that they wanted Jackson to do. Grundy can do in particular, like you say, he's a ruck rover. So I think it's been really great for him, to be honest, to have the responsibility, and it's been also great that he's stepped up and played so well in the last two games because, just for no other reason other than you're at a new club. He's, one suspects, his teammates are loving the way he's playing. And his tapping to advantage was off the charts in this game. Just such pure ruck work, like better than Maxi in some respects. Like I saw the stat around his hit outs to advantage was, I always get
it was 13.
39% of his taps were to advantage.
Yeah, that is just
that's off the chart.
Yeah, and it's a bit what you were saying, George, about that's how he is different to Maxi. So he's got better ruck craft. Not better. He's got a different ruck craft, but he was really on song, and it seemed to be a great synergy with Viney, with all of the midfields. And so, that is really fast-tracking both his connection to the midfields, his place within the team, the respect, obviously, from his teammates, which it may not have happened if he was sort of cribbing. It's an interesting question about what that means. I think what you said before, Andy, is probably not far off the mark. There's a good chance that Maxi maybe will play more forward than he otherwise might have if it went for this. And coming back from an injury, it's probably practical anyway so maybe instead of it being 50-50, it might even be 60% Grundy in the ruck and 40% up forward. What that means for the forward line, I think, is the tall's got to come out, but that goes back to the conversation we had before, is I think they'll take a squad mentality in particular to the forward, and I agree totally with George's point about they'll really rotate those tall forwards. It'll be interesting to see whether they give Maxi a chop out too, at some stage. He won't want that. So, no. But, that's another option.
Well, look, you'd never want any injuries, but if there was to be a silver lining, as you said, and I mentioned earlier, it's fast-tracked that synergy with the other guys, and it also gave us a look at just having Grundy himself to the point where, maybe Grundy will take 60-40. So, otherwise we wouldn't have seen that. We wouldn't have known that that's an option, that maybe Grundy can do more in there, and then Max maybe can play more forward. So we'll see. It'll be interesting when he comes back because and it's a good thing. It's a good problem to have.
And just on the forward line, Viper Crunch in the chat room, and apologies, by the way, I meant to check the chat room last week and forgot, but he notes that Fritter's always been regarded as a tall, or there's a question, hasn't he? I'm not entirely sure whether that's true, but he essentially does play as a tall. I mean, he is such a great mark one-on-one. That mark he took, I forget who kicked it to him, but it just his use of the body to create that means that you cannot afford just to play a small on him the way that we might play a medium like we played Hibbo, for instance, on taller players, or Melksham as a defensive forward. You've got to play a player who's good aerially against Fritter, otherwise he'll take you to the Queens.
He used his body really well last week against one of the McCartans, who were both very strong.
That's what I mean.
Players,
that you can't run a small on Fritter, and he'll outmark anyone shorter than him because he doesn't really need strength. It's just how well he reads it and keeps the space behind him, or more behind him in that case. So it really creates, that's obviously what Goody's trying to do, but it creates, three talls and Fritter creates a real problem for any defence in the AFL, because what teams have got three quality talls and another good medium defender?
Who's also good when the ball hits the deck as well. How good is his snaps for goal? When he's got ball in hand on his left foot for a snap, that's going through the goals.
Yeah, that one he kicked, I thought it's like I'd never been more confident that a player was going to snap kick a goal.
Before it even hit his boot, I knew that was a goal. And at that stadium where he knows it like the back of his hand. And
I was particularly pleased that he kicked that goal at the end of the first quarter, because it was a beautiful lead up, and you love those goals after the siren. Not again.
It used to always,
when you kick them, when we kick them, not.
It used to always be against us, right?
That's right. Red time. They mentioned that on the call, is that Melbourne are fantastic in red time, and red time they mean is the last 2 or 3 minutes of the game.
That kills teams. That kills teams. It deflates them. We have a question from one of our hosts, Bim Man, who says there seems to be a bit of chatter that the club is using the sub rule to get Melk to 100 games at the Ds, though not so much after JJ got the nod against the Eagles. The inference being Melk has not been selected on merit. I understand giving a fringe player 1, maybe 2 games to get them to the 100-game milestones, but would an AFL club really gift a player who has already achieved that milestone, and in Melk's case, also the 200-game milestones, 5 to 6 games to get them to 100 games for a new club? I assume the logic is by doing so, it means any future father-son/daughter rule is on the table. Well, I don't know about the father, son, daughter for Melk. His boys are very, very young. It's different if a player had a sort of a teenage son or something who was sort of showing something. But are they really looking at that? Surely they're not thinking future father, son.
There was this suggestion on Demonland that was a factor, and it was a genuine question, because I don't know inside clubs. Like, my own vibe would be no way. Like, would they do it? But I've heard it I don't know. I mean, what do you think, George? Would
I think the easy answer was I can't remember on the in the commentary on Demonland came up with the answer. Really, if you've got two players who are at that fringe, and you've got the possibility of getting someone for 15, 20 years time, getting a father-son or a father-daughter, and getting them to 100 games for the club as a landmark. In any case, if you've got two players who are at that fringe point, this one or that one. Let's use the example of Jimmy Jordan. Jim's going to be around for a while. Melcham's not going to be. In 2 or 3 years, do you go, oh, gee, I wish we had given Melcham that extra game or two, because Jim's still here and he's doing playing for the club, but Melcham is not. It's a difficult one, but absolutely, I agree that you don't get gifted games, and you certainly don't get gifted games under Simon Goodwin.
No, I mean that's my vibe, but just curious. I can see the logic, not gifting, but making sure a club champion gets 200 or 250 or 300, but 100 for a second club. But certainly not for father son. But I don't know, is 100. I guess 100 for a club is a big deal, isn't it? So
it's all part of building the culture.
That's a good point.
We were so deficient in for so many years because we didn't look after our own. And this is just another example of looking after your own.
Yeah, I heard Bickley was on 360 last night, and he was talking about that era that he played, and that what they didn't know then, obviously, is that they ended up having in that team, that brilliant team under Blight, players that went on to play 300 games, like Jarman and McLeod, a whole bunch of players who went, Bickley. I'm not sure if Goodwin ended up, but they had 6 players, and he mentioned that Melbourne is 150 years old and had 2 players who've played 300, which is a bit of a drive-by, but so I guess those milestones are significant for a club.
They are, but then there's also, I'll bring this question up earlier now. Demons 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2000 asked the question about JJ, saying, I feel that he's a player that would be in the top 22 in most sides. Do you think at the end of the season, if not a regular, he'll be snapped up by the likes of Hawthorn or North or the nosediving Bombers? And I think we'll absolutely lose JJ at year's end if he isn't given a regular opportunity. I believe he's put his contract negotiations on hold, and I don't blame him one bit. I think he's a walk-up start to almost any team in the competition, including he should be at the Ds. I rate him. And if he doesn't get a crack in the Ds 23 on a regular basis by year's end, I'd have no hard feelings if he were to explore his opportunities elsewhere. He's way too good to be playing VFL footy. And that comes into what you were saying about Melksham. If you're saying, if you got the choice out of the two, well, if you're not going to give it to JJ, he's going to walk at the end of the year, and he's possibly part of our future, where Melksham, he might not be playing for the Ds at the end of the year. And
footy's version of opportunity
no
cost.
Disrespect to Melksham.
Yeah.
Andy, I can absolutely assure you that if you have a good, successful side, you will lose players.
Yeah,
I know,
because they are.
I know, but if it's a matter of, I want to keep them all. I know. I like.
I suspect they'll use JJ often as the sub. I mean, the bottom line is you can't. I mean, it's a great problem. It's a bit of a cliche. Yeah. I wrote on Demonland in actually about this point earlier in the week that it reminds me of the scenario with Kennedy at Hawthorn. Now, the part of basically Hawthorn's royal family, the Kennedys, he was a good player at Hawthorn, but was never going to be a regular 22 in that team, like not for a while anyway. He went to Sydney. He's been a total star for Sydney, or was a total star for Sydney. Brilliant midfielder. Everyone in hindsight thinks, well, how could Hawthorn let him go? But at the time, no one, it was a similar situation to JJ. Everyone knew how good he was. It was pretty clear how good he was. He just wasn't going to get past all of the stars that they had in their midfield in the short term, maybe in the medium term. But he wanted to play premiership footy, which he ended up doing. He wanted to get regular AFL time in the seniors, playing as a mid, and that's what he got. So it was a win-win for him. It was certainly a win for the Swans, but that's, I guess, uncharted territory for the Demons for at least in my time of barracking for them.
We do have, I'll play our voicemail now. This is, I think he's been around on Demonland for a long time, 3183D, and here he is.
Hi, Andy, George, and Binman. This is 3183D calling from the Badlands of Balaclava. Just wanted to call in, long-time listener, first-time caller, love the podcast. I would like to get your opinion on the role that Lockie Hunter has played since he's come in this year. I feel he's really balanced the team up now, the side going forwards with Lingers on one side now and Lockie Hunter on the other. With his ball use, I think he's been exceptional. The second thing is also with the amount of players now running through the midfield, and I guess the versatility now of our side, even with Petty going forward. And then players like Rivers and Cozzy now running through the middle. I think we've added a real versatility now to our team, which makes it difficult to predict for oppositions. Anyway, boys, love the work. Look forward to hearing you each week, and keep going. Cheers.
So we've spoken about the versatility. We don't need to go over that. But Hunter, who wants to take that? He's looking really good. Great acquisition, as we've said each week.
I think we talked a little bit about this last week. Hunter, we hunted sort of thing, because we knew, Langdon was so good on that one wing on his own. That other clubs were already, avoiding the Langdon wing and what he was providing. Now they haven't got that option with Hunter doing exactly the same thing on the other side. He is a brilliant kick, and his ability to get kicks away where others probably wouldn't is just fantastic to watch. He is lethal with that left foot, and his ability to see inside to the leading forwards. Forwards like Fritsch and Spargo and the other talls in there would be absolutely salivating when Hunter's got ball in hand coming up the wing. So he's really added a lot to it. And like I said last week, the other thing is his presence there has released other players to do other things, which adds to the versatility that you were talking about throughout the whole side. So where we were trying to fill the gaps last year, we don't have to this year. It's quite a very, very magnificent recruiting decision or choice that was made available to us.
Totally, could not agree more. I mean, on the weekend, I caught myself thinking Hunter and Grundy, we won a flag in 2021 and we bring in two players of those qualities, that quality, and not pay much for them in terms of trade or not really much opportunity cost. And then, but in particular Hunter, because it was, speaking of systems and structures and roles, everyone now knows the importance of the wing role. Like in footy, it's been that way for 4 or 5 years now. And it was so clear that we were missing one of those wingmen. That, we had JJ playing wing. He doesn't look a natural there. We had Spargo doing a bit of that time. Brayshaw had to play there. So we had players that we were dragging out of their best positions to fill a hole. Hunter not only allows those players to go back and play the roles that they're best at, he solves that problem of the wing. But I think, a couple of things, George, that spot on is one, that it creates a problem for the opposition. And it seems in terms of you can't focus of keeping the ball away from Langdon because Hunter's equally as damaging. I thought Langdon played fantastic on the weekend, and in part because of Hunter. But I think I hadn't thought of that point before, George, but you're spot on. He is such a good kick when he's under pressure. And, he's like to not give up. We talked about the pressure before. All of that around is about disrupting their ability to hit a target, whether that be your hand or foot. And he's amazing at keeping his balance and off half a step, even less, still hitting a target, makes really good decisions. He's surprisingly quick. like I talked about the GPS numbers, and on the weekend there was a chase that he did, and he really stuck with the player that he was chasing. He's a lot better athlete than I knew that he was a good athlete in terms of endurance, but he's a lot better athlete in terms of the speed. He covers the ground. He doesn't really look like it. He's a bit stocky, and he's been a fantastic addition, and he doesn't need to get any more than 20 kicks to be, or 20 possessions to be a damaging player. Been a great pickup, and that kick inside 50 that he did, on the angle, as you say, he's just going to help us no end with that entry inside 50. And all of those things were what we said we wanted from him. And he said that when you hear him interview about what his role's going to be before the season started, he said all of those things. And so it's one of those rare things he's come in and played exactly that role, because there's plenty of other examples of players that don't end up playing the role that they've moved clubs to do, like Howe to Collingwood. He was going to be their forward salvation, but apparently Buckley turned him into a good defender. So there's plenty of examples where it doesn't happen, but this is one where he's just basically the role we played at the Dogs. He's come straight across to the D's. He's playing the same role.
D Zephyr says, Langdon looks really refreshed. The smart acquisition of Hunter has helped a lot. As good as Langdon has been the last 2 seasons, we've become predictable with him being on the one wing for the entire match. Love watching him on both sides of the ground now. Started to hit his straps the last 2 weeks. He's around 92% total time on ground so far this season. Just enough of a rest to recharge the marathon man, because I remember last year he was like 100%.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Youngblood agrees, saying, yeah, I agree, especially in the last 2 games he's been so effective. I was trying to find his disposal efficiency stats. He rarely wastes the ball and he's usually really proactive with his ball use. I watched him closely against the Swans. He never stops moving, particularly around the contest. He's always relocating to receive the ball. Would be so annoying to play on. I would think it's also very tricky to tag a wing. Don't really know. We all know how good Langdon is. I don't think we need to go over that. Mandalorian writes, I really love the podcast, guys. It's a must listen every week in my household. Last week you highlighted our accurate kicking for goal, and it most definitely has improved under the tutelage of Choco Williams. How good was Track's set shot kicking? 2 set shots from 2 goals this week, for 2 goals this week. In previous years, those same set shots were no certainties. He also nailed a nice set shot last week too. Our set shot kicking overall has been fantastic. Lazy adds, we've spoken at length about Mark Williams' influence as goal-kicking coach, but do you guys think Cozzy is still swirling the ball around a bit too much in his run-up when taking a set shot? I don't know. Either of you guys had a close look at Cozzy when he's having set shots for goal? I mostly thought he missed his...
Not sure.
Cozzy can do what he likes when he's...
Well, I thought he missed... I thought he was missing his snaps this week.
I couldn't believe one of the snaps. It was a bit like that Fritter one where you put down the glasses. But on track, he's 100%. That's 100% right. He's simplified his run up. I'd love to know. I presume this is a Williams thing, but he looks like how he did in his first season. He was really accurate in his first season. He had a really uncomplicated run up, which is more like he has now, 2 or 3 steps, and that's the same way that Grundy kicks for goal as well. No big long run up, 2 or 3 step, get balanced. His body's square. He's not spinning the ball. He's not spinning it like he was. I love how wrapped he is after every set shot he gave. Though I'm not sure. Did you see it, Andy? I'm not sure what it's in reference to. I'm guessing maybe his Instagram.
Oh, when he does
thing,
that,
whatever
something. What's cooking?
Stirring the pot.
Because I saw some pictures of Getty Images, and some of it was he was stirring the thing, but he also gave the bird in one of them. So it might have been to someone in the crowd.
I mean, as I said, we're number 1 on by a bit in terms of accuracy, which I'd be guessing at around 4 of the season. Probably, maybe we've never been number 1 on that particular metric. Our field kicking has been absolutely elite this season, and I just love to see it. And the big one is that some of our worst kicks have improved, and it's got to be, you've got to hats off to Williams. I'd love to get him on, Andy, if you could organise to speak to him, because I'm really curious about the approach he's taken, because the 2 players I think have really improved their disposal is Langdon, as we talked about before. He makes good decisions, doesn't go for too much, but he's created his own special Langdon kick, that kick back into the corridor. He did a couple against the West Coast, and the other one is Nibbler. Nibbler's really improved his ability to hit targets. He's a lot more accurate. He's accurate, relatively accurate for goal this season. And I wonder whether part of that is as you were saying with Hunter, is the amount of running Hunter does. Maybe Nibbler doesn't have to do quite as much, and if that's the case, he's not going to be as fatigued, which is going to help his kicking both for goal and in general field play.
D Old Fart says, it's still early days, but to my eyes, a few of our second tier / third tier players have lifted their contributions and consistency by a notch or two this year. In particular, I'm thinking of Sparrow, Rivers, Chandler, and when given the opportunity, JJ. I'd love your comments on this observation, please. If this can be sustained, I reckon it could prove decisive come the later rounds and September. Love the pod. Keep up the great work, guys. Any thoughts on that? Yep.
Definitely the case for a couple of reasons. I think that we're seeing the maturing of these players is the first thing. You forget how young they are and how few years they've been around. But the other thing is the competition for spots. People like Chandler and JJ and know that they've only got to be down a little bit one week, and they're probably not going to be in the team next week. So that inspires them. But yeah, they're definitely maturing, particularly Sparrow. I've been very, very impressed with in the last couple of weeks. He's gone from a sort of in and out of the game a lot. He's providing a lot more of the grunt work around the packs. It's Jack Viney's birthday tomorrow when he turns 29. Do you forget that Jack Viney is 29? In a couple of years, he's not going to be here. Who's going to replace him? Someone like a Tom Sparrow. So, it's good to see these players maturing, coming on very nicely.
And I think the question, I totally agree with pretty much all of it. And just for this season, they every year, and they talk about it's not your top 10 players that get you the flag. It's the so-called bottom 10 or 11.
Bottom six,
the bottom six that are difference. And your bottom six are younger players coming up. So, you don't win a flag without them. The other thing is, as I've talked a lot about, is that the game is so aerobically challenging. It is so reliant now on pace over the ground in a way that it wasn't. That's, teams that cover the ground. You need those, like Selwyn Griffith said on the interview we did with him, 800-metre runners. Younger players, that's one of the strengths of Collingwood is they've got younger players who are fresher, who aren't carrying the sorts of injuries or, that Brown has, for instance, those sorts of things. So I think it's really important both for the now and, as George suggests, for the future as well, to get those players. Sparrow's how many games has he played now? He's 60, 70 games? So similarly with Spargo, you think of Bowie, suddenly they're getting up to that key 70, 80 game mark, and that's where you get your experience. So they're already relatively experienced, some of those young players.
Oh My D's has produced a chart comparing the first 4 rounds of 2021, 2022 and 2023 and the contents, and he contends that on the above metrics, the D's are vastly overperforming in season 2023 compared with 2022. Points for have increased 32%. Average winning margin is 114% increase. These increases in our offensive strength may have impacted our stingy defence with a 24% increase in points against this year, but it seems to be well worth it considering we're scoring over 100 points on average per game. Does the panel think this can be attributed to the D's taking more risks with faster ball movement and using the corridor? Can we sustain this offensive pressure throughout the season proper? Bin Man?
Yeah, it was definitely the more aggressive, higher risk football we're playing is the driver of those scores. And as one of the questions was last week, does that automatically or does that usually mean that the opposition are going to score more? And we saw that play out on the weekend, is that, that they wouldn't have scored as much as they did if we weren't taking the risks that we did. But yeah, that's definitely a factor. I think the more aggressive ball use. The other factor is how fit we are, because we're outnumbering at the contest. We're creating turnovers simply because we are running so well over the ground. People talk about Collingwood doing that, but and as if it's a new thing, we've been doing it since 2021, where we are running in waves. We're getting multiple players outnumbering in both defense and offense. I think that's a massive factor. Whether it's sustainable, my own view happens every year. As listeners will know, I punt on footy, and one of my things that I like is total match point. Is so in the first few weeks of the season, that was a good bet over total match point, and it's changed now, and so now it's a dead bet because the scores are going down. Teams will have to start looking at taking away our one wood, and they'll look to do that just as they will with Collingwood. So scores will go down. It is likely to, if our running power drops off at any stage because of whatever reason, injury or impact of fatigue or whatever it is, we will find that hard to score. The critical question is not whether it drops over during the season, which it will, probably during the mid-season period. It's whether we can recreate that offensive power in the come finals. That's and if all things being equal, I think we will.
Graham Yates.
I think.
Go ahead. George.
Sorry,
that's right.
Just the other thing is, I think there's a lot of teams adopting the high scoring mode as well. So we're seeing it across the whole board. Teams are attacking far deeper and far more up the centre, which is resulting in higher scores. So it's not surprising, for example, that our points against has gone up as well because the opposition are doing the same thing to us. But you look at Geelong games, St Kilda's on top of the ladder with a huge percentage. There's big scores in the games, over 100 points, even though it's only 4 rounds in. Seems to be the winning score for the winning side. So, football's perhaps a little bit more exciting than what it is when Ross Lyon was last around.
But it'll swing back, and it does. People, and I mean that's a really good point, George. Is West Coast, for instance, were quite aggressive in some of their ball movement and turned it over. So, it's helpful for Melbourne because we're so good defensively and we're so good creating turnovers. So all power to any team who wants to take us on, including Collingwood, including Sydney, because we'll punish them, and that gives us more opportunity at scoring.
Graham Yates's mullet says, what do you make of the regular Jack Viney bagging on Demonland? He plays in a scrappy part of the field and is first touch in many contested sequences. It's hardly fair to expect him to compete with the likes of Bowie for disposal efficiency. He had 7 clearances, 5 inside 50s and 9 score involvements against West Coast at 82% disposal efficiency and 1 goal, and 5 clearances, 6 inside 50s and 4 score involvements, all inside 50s resulting in goals against Sydney at 58% disposal efficiency. I think he's thriving and playing some of his best footy. I wasn't aware that people were openly bashing Jack Viney on Demonland. So, Jack, it's posters at Demonland, not me, Demonland itself. So don't come looking for me.
Happy birthday, Jack, and you'll be in the side for a long, long time.
Yeah. I mean, on Demon Dynasty's player running that I mentioned before, he was third behind Oliver and Trent Rivers in that game. So, yeah, I don't get the criticism. I mean, it's a bit similar, like I was saying before. I don't get the criticism of him. He's got a specific role. Like there was a little bit of a discussion about JJ should come in ahead of Sparrow for this game.
Yeah, I saw that.
And so that was, and my response to that was they're not competing for the same spot. Captain Jack's in there for his power. He's a power player, just like Jack Viney. Those two players are the yin and the yang. So you need those sorts of players, that grunt player who is dynamic, who tackles hard, who hits hard, who wins the ball, gets it forward. I mean, I think his kicking's improved heaps in the last couple of years. Partly that's to do with the fact that he's had a couple of, at least this preseason, where he could train in footy boots for most of the time and kick. There's been preseasons where he's not even been able to do any kicking hardly because of his feet issues. Because of the role he plays, almost by definition, he's going to have a lot of his disposal efficiency. It's going to be tricky because he's always kicking under pressure, or pretty much always. He's been fantastic. He was fantastic in this game. But beyond that, there's the intangible of of how much his teammates love him and love him not, for what he's such a great role model on field, and that has to be factored into what he brings He's a leader in every sense.
How was that tackle?
he's-
That almost spear tackle, but I think he perfectly did it to
He
avoid.
did. He brought him down like a little baby. I thought.
But like a little baby, but I think the guy still felt it.
Yeah.
Completely fantastic. It's time for another rights. Out of interest, do any of you guys have a handle on rotations while you're watching a game? I don't think I have a hope of tracking them. Neither do I, actually. I'm hoping Big Man does. Or George. I've developed a fascination with the stat of percentage time on ground, and I know, George, you have as well. It gives a very interesting picture about how players are viewed internally, how they are managed, etc. For instance, Grundy is shouldering the ruck predominantly on his own while Gawn is out. He had a brilliant 22 disposals versus Eagles to go with the 33 hitouts. I hadn't thought about it, but I would have figured he's getting up around 85 to 90% game time. What would you guys guess? It was actually the third least of the whole team, only 71%, which means he was off the ground for a full quarter and a quarter of a game. The only players with less time were Jordan, of course, and who was the sub, and then interestingly Sparrow with only 65%. The other interesting one was Track with only 76% compared to Clary with 87%. 14 players had more game time than him. The other one that's interesting is Viney, who usually only plays around 76% compared to the other midfielders who are usually around 86%. My guess is his foot has to be managed. Rivers and Bowie before this year used to only play in the mid-60s. On the weekend, he was 80% and 85%. Denox answers that. So he says, I don't have a hope of tracking everything, but I did try to track JVR and Grundy in the Sydney game. There was a clear pattern in all four quarters to how those two interacted positions on the ground and when they were off for a rest. It was sort of like start of the quarter, Grundy in the ruck, JVR forward. 10-minute mark, JVR off for a rest, Grundy in the ruck. 15 minutes, JVR on and into the ruck, Grundy off for a rest. 20 minutes, JVR goes forward, Grundy back in the ruck. Very approximate, but it followed the same pattern in terms of order and positions each quarter. Against West Coast, though, this pattern definitely wasn't followed. Timing was different and so were positions, with others including T-Mac and Petty taking centre bounces. Their time on grounds were a bit different each game too. Grundy dropped from 77 versus the Swans to 71 versus West Coast, while JVR was similar with 72% versus 74%. I wonder if the change in time on ground for Grundy was a preservation thing. We had already won, have a long flight, and play a team with a lot of tools on a 6-day break. Who wants to... Anything you guys want to add to that?
All I'd add is that, in case you're not aware of it, the rotations occur in particular roles around the ground. So you'll see the players, for example, one of the mids will roll into the sort of centre half forward type position, half forward flank before they roll off the ground, or they'll roll off the ground onto that position, then take the next centre square ball up. So it's occurring around the whole ground. That ensures that you get the right players in the right positions. You just can't take players on and off, put a ruck in for someone who's a rover effectively. That's the first thing. But if you listen again to Selwyn Griffith's interview the other week, he is heavily monitoring the loads of the players in the game and from week to week. So you've got a couple of factors. If a player is a little bit overloaded, for example, they'll drop down as best they can, and the game is very difficult to manage as best they can, or they'll identify players who can take more of the role. But I think what the interesting thing in this game, which was different from probably the way we played last year, was the evenness across all the players, all heading around about that mid-75 mark, with a few exceptions. The usual exceptions are the Mays and the Levers and the two wingers, who previously even were always up 100. It was 100. It's amazing when Langdon took a break in one game last year. But he's now running at about 91% or 93s and things like that. So they're spreading the load around, but I suspect that's Selwyn Griffith working in the background that we're just not aware of. But during a game, it is really difficult to get people on and off the ground, and that affects you by 5%. That's 5 minutes in a game.
And I think you can't be too fixated from one week to the next on whether it was 71 one week and 74 the next, because in 1 week they might have done 71%, but they've run 4 kilometres more or 2, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just throwing numbers out there. So Selwyn Griffiths is more looking at kilometres done because that's how they manage the loading and whatever, however you want to put it, whatever wording you want to do, how many kilometres per week they do. So their time on ground might be centred around how much running in particular they've done that day, and it'll be different.
And
from play
not
to
just
play.
how much running, they're like distance.
And distance
how much
and speed
different
and,
types of
yeah,
running
yeah,
they've done,
endurance
how much
and-
sprints they've done, how much, walking speed, striding speed, as we talked about.
See, we're not us here in the
Yeah.
watching the game. We're not looking at those drilling down into those statistics. You know,
Yeah.
we might look later at time on ground, but that's only giving a tiny part of the picture. It's not giving us the full.
But just on those numbers, Sparrow's numbers was interesting, and I don't know what he averages, but again, it doesn't surprise me that he would be 60 odd % because, like I said, he's what, as George has noted a few times, you want there's player to come on and have a physical impact. It's like he's a player who relies on his strength, and he's a power athlete, and he's dynamic in the way he moves forward. And so you need to give players, to get the most out of that type of player, you need to make sure that they're playing as much of the game as is possible, completely ready to roll. And so, sometimes with a player like him, if he's been on the ground for a while and he hasn't got that strength, maybe it looks like, oh, geez, he's not playing as well, or he's dropped off. And it might be because, he's expected to come on and smash into packs and drive through and to stand up in tackles, just like Jack Viney. And Track is another power sort of player in a similar way.
All right, let's get into the Casey portion. After a slow start in the Casey match against Frankston Dolphins, the Demons put on a clinic for the next 2 quarters, booting the next 9 goals unanswered and holding an unassailable 49-point lead going into the final turn. The final margin was 60 points as Casey rocketed to the top spot on the ladder after 3 straight victories. There were many stars for Casey. Bailey Laurie, 35 disposals, 6 tackles and a goal from the middle, and he was a standout. He was accompanied by Luke Dunstan, 26 touches, and the much improved youngster in Livewire, Andy Moniz Wakefield. Blake Howes again stood out with his good ball control and running through lines. Forward Matt Jefferson showed great goal awareness near the big sticks. He can also take a mark, and he's kicked 3 goals. Josh Shackey was also among the goals while pinch hitting in the ruck as well. Coming back from injury, Daniel Turner stood up in defence, where he and Deacon Smith toiled hard all day. Young forward Oliver Seston flashed in and out of play and again showed his promise for the future. We're going to get into changes for a second, but I don't know. Are any Casey players in the mix, do you think, this week, George?
No, I saw the Casey game, and the surprising thing was, not unexpectedly, the number of Melbourne players who weren't there. They obviously took a fair contingent over to Perth as a result, but the good thing for Casey was the fact that they still easily won against Frankston. Yes, Laurie got 35 possessions, and Dunstan, did well, and but they're not. Unfortunately, they're not pushing for a place because there is no place at the moment. Shackey up forward was Shackey. He looks good at times and then is easily out-muscled the next time the ball comes down. Jefferson and Howe look very promising. Jefferson's got a great pair of hands. Took a couple of marks, but he's pure development.
Yeah, we won't see him until next year, into next year. So I'm not worried.
He's the same as what we're doing with Van Royen. He's going to play 20 games down at Casey, get some experience, build up some muscle, and he'll be available for us for selection next year. There was nothing at Casey that would warrant someone coming into the side this week. We've got plenty of other options ahead of, unfortunately, the players down there. I do feel sorry for Laurie, and he's another player who at the end of the year will probably be looking for better options elsewhere. There's no use getting 35 possessions at the VFL and not getting a game every week. So,
All right.
On
go ahead.
Jefferson, he's a good competitor in the way I've heard him compared to JVR from that perspective. What's he said? I haven't watched enough of him yet, really.
He is got a great pair of hands. Contested marking is a real forte of his, but he's physically not developed enough yet.
But you're not going to lose that contested marking ability, and once he builds up, that's just going to be.
It's only going to get better as he puts on some weight and, and endurance and things like that, and provides more to the side. He continually seems, it's only a couple of games in, seems to be at the right place at the right time. So he's kicking goals because he's in the goal square, because nobody else seems to notice him being there for whatever reason. But hey, he's kicking goals, so that's good.
That's it, and just develop him and put on another pre-season under his belt. Be very happy with that. All right, let's get into changes. Before we get into the changes, though, Doug Remus says, with 5 very winnable games coming up in the Bombers, Tigers, North, Suns and Hawks, I'd expect us on paper to win all 5 of them, putting us at 8-1, with what I'd imagine being a robust percentage, with 3 out of the next 5 being a lot tougher. I'm not giving Freo or the Cats any credit. Can you see the club managing any players leading into the Port Adelaide away game? Grundy is holding up very well now at the moment, but give him a month of being the top dog. He might need a little freshen up by the time Max is back, hopefully a week or 2 before King's birthday. Well, I think he's going to be back earlier than that. We're at full strength and hopefully looking at one hell of a game versus the Pies, who we owe from last year. My only worry is that we seem to be in the mid-year bye period, that in previous years the loading seems to happen. Do you think we may have to alter this tactic this year, Binman, and load a little later? Or did last year's loading not even happen because the playing group was incredibly banged up from the previous year?
Well, interestingly, it definitely happened. And interesting, Selwyn Griffith talked, when we asked him that question, he said they were just talking about that this morning when they were looking to do that and looking at the dates at when they would do that, basically. We'll definitely, there'll be a period of extra training.
But what was interesting was I think Selwyn also said that because we didn't get a decent break this year, they'd be looking at almost loading at various times during the year. So, for example, before the Richmond game, we've got a 9-day break. So that's the time that you might see them doing extra work, whereas you won't necessarily see it at the bye round because we haven't got a
buy. Yeah, he made that point, didn't he? He was sounding quite frustrated actually around that and the planning that throws out. It was his response to that was quite interesting in the terms of, I guess, as an insight into the amount of planning that they have to do for this stuff. Like he literally said, we were just talking about that this morning and looking at the when we can fit that time in. It goes back to that squad mentality. The answer to that question last year would be no. And that's how it panned out, much to many people's chagrin. But, it seems to me that they're talking about the squad mentality now is that, so I would think, yes, there is a chance that they'll rest a Grundy. We've talked already about, we think that they'll rotate their forwards a bit. It makes sense to rest, to not load up or not put too much work into BB. If you can avoid it, you want him playing finals. Tommy Max in the same boat. Maybe Maxi's in the same boat. So, yeah, short answer is yes. I can see them rolling through players, and maybe that's where the younger players come in. They don't need that sort of chop out, perhaps.
Ben Brown, Michael Hibberd and Jake Lever with his glass ankle are all listed as test. But Ben Brown back, Michael Hibberd Achilles, and Jake Lever, his glass ankle, listed as test. Who comes in, who goes out this week, George?
It's going to be a hard one this week.
Rain forecasted, as we've mentioned.
Yeah.
But maybe not as heavy as it's heavy rain at night. That's what it says.
It looks like it's going to rain sort of overnight beforehand into most of the day, but it looks like it may not rain around the time of our game and then rain that night for the next game after. But it might be worse then.
Yeah, I think the definite out is Hibberd.
They've said that, haven't they?
From what Goody said today, basically. The question is, what effect does that have on the rest of the side? Do we bring Petty back? Does Ben Brown come back? I doubt that they will bring him back off a 6-day break. Here's the opportunity to give him a good break until the next game. Particularly with back issues, of whatever it might be. But rest is about the best solution for back issues as far as I can gather. Van Rooyen is doing all right. T-Mac's back playing well. There's no need to change anything up forward. who comes in. It's really difficult to say. We'll have the same situation with the JJ Melcham as the sub. I'd imagine something around that mark.
My tip is JJ will come, Hibbo out, JJ will come in, and Melksham will go back to the sub.
Yeah.
Unless they want to take the opportunity to. I'll be really curious because I mentioned a few weeks ago that Goody was interviewed on Melbourne Footy Club website and asked about how they'll use the sub, and he said it'll be a mixture of load management and horses for courses, and I wonder whether they might use that as a way to address some of the challenges that we've touched on of having players on the bubble of selection, like whether they could use that as a reward system almost to keep people like, a player like Tomo or get him into the side to replace Hibbo. So that might be the other option is JJ stays on the bench, Tomo comes back for Hibbo. That might, be one way, but my guess will be JJ into the starting 22 and Melksham on the bench, and then they'll shuffle the defenders. Maybe Brayshaw plays a more proactive role down there or a more traditional defensive role.
Well, because we're doing this podcast quite late, when most people listen to it, if they're in the next day or two, they'll be laughing at us with predictions.
Wow.
So let's move on from that one because they'll know already who's in and who's out. It's a clash between third and fourth on the ladder that is being hitted away as the untelevised, or at least on free-to-air, curtain raiser to an irrelevant match between two teams that sit outside the 8. Essendon have wowed their long-suffering fans by barely beating up three bottom four teams in Hawthorn by 59 points, Gold Coast by 28 points and GWS by 13 points. In between, they lost to the ladder leader, the unbeaten Saints, by 18 points. Last week, they were extremely inaccurate, kicking 22 points from their 33 scoring shots, and surely they won't be as inaccurate this week. Supreme Demon asks, what do we need to do to beat Essendon? Who are the danger players at Essendon we need to be mindful of besides Jake Stringer? Who should we use as the super sub? Or you've talked about that already against Essendon. Take it away. How are we going to beat Big Man? How are we going to beat Essendon?
Well, playing our game for a start, get the game on our terms. The weather's a little bit of a wild card, but if it is wet, it suits us because we're a contested ball winning team. That's our one wood, if you like. So the wetter it is, the more that comes into play. If it isn't wet, we're every chance of opening them up as much as we did against Eagles. I can really see us putting, I can see us winning this game by 6-7 goals, to be honest, because if the weather is okay, because defensively they're woeful. Essendon have still continually to struggle defensively and teams open them up. They haven't played a team that has got the offensive power that we've got. And the way that we're playing at the moment seems to be they're taking a line from last year, which makes me sort of think, last year they were already experimenting, is that how hard we went out of the blocks from about, the last third of last season. It's the same in this season. We're coming out hard, looking to put the game out of reach as early as we can. Playing hard, maybe not taking as many risks. As I said last week, against the Swans, we really increased the risks once we got that margin. So not necessarily taking high risk, but certainly coming out hard and fierce right from the get-go. We've really brought it, haven't we, except for the Brisbane game. That critical first 10 minutes of the game when you really get a sense whether, I hate the phrase, whether a team's turned up or not, but you really know, don't you, when Melbourne, that first 10 minutes of footy, if that's how it pans out again, I can see us crushing them, to be honest. And I expect we will. So I'm thinking a 6-7 goal win, partly because they haven't been tested. Their position on the ladder notwithstanding, I don't rate them. But their big thing is they're defensively. They rely so much on Redmond to bounce off half-back flank, just in a similar way to the way, not quite the way Lyons and Rich, but his movement off half-back flank is so critical to them. They'll take him out of the game, and if they nullify him, they really struggle to move it from the half-back flank. And I think that it's Wiedemann's I hesitate to say it's a big out for them, but it's like a key position forward. I mean, they don't have a great tall forward setup. Draper, I think, will be interesting to see how he goes up against Grundy. But Draper's not as fit as Grundy, so he's got a big task to follow Grundy around all day, and that's going to be critical. I think Stringer, everyone loves to talk about Stringer when he's up and about, but if he's not kicking goal, he's a liability, and so I'll be really curious to see who goes to him. Hibbo probably would have, wouldn't he, George?
Yeah.
So maybe Rivers, or I'm not sure, but if you nullify him, he becomes a weakness, because he doesn't do enough running. I mean, people talk about that torp, everyone loves it. Goody would drag him for that kick, because he had players that he could have given it to. Looks good, comes off, fantastic. But, if he's not getting goals, he's close to a liability, I reckon. So I can see us really getting a hold of him.
Yeah, totally and utterly agree with everything you said there. Their defensive systems are virtually non-existent. Like you said, Redmond's the only decent one there, and he will have more than his hands full with 3 tall forwards of Melbourne, of whatever persuasion we choose to put down there. They simply won't be able to cope with it. But there was a comment from one of the posters talking about, who had a friend at the St Kilda game, who said that Essendon lost that as soon as St Kilda put some pressure on them, they fell apart. And they're going to get a lot more pressure than what St Kilda's can provide to win the game in this particular one. But yeah, they've got a lot of problems. Their kicking was absolutely appalling. They were 3-13 at one stage. 3/4 time it was 6-19. And they only came good in the last quarter with 11-22. But a lot of those were set shots. It was just incredible, the poor kicking for goal. And if they do the same
under
sort of
the
thing
roof, under the roof,
Sorry?
as well. Under the roof,
yeah,
at Marvel,
under the
wasn't
roof,
it?
yeah. Draper was just appalling. His shots. Anyhow, that's their worry. Draper hasn't got much of a tank. It was surprising because Phillips started up in the ruck for them. Your best ruckman isn't taking the first bounce, for example. Seemed very strange to me, but they're obviously managing the time on the ground because the guy can't run all that much. So he'll get exposed. Stringer, I'm not worried about. He is one of the laziest players in the competition.
Yeah. Defensively, he doesn't offer anything.
Yeah, and if at the end of the game, you're probably wondering why someone like a Trent Rivers has had 27 possessions, because Stringer has done nothing about.
Yeah, and he's running off him.
He's running off him all game. Happens all the time. The trouble is, Stringer's like a few players in the competition, sits out the back, gets the goals because he won't do the running because the ball goes over the back and gets to him. But as a team player, he is not. So, I think we've got too many things going for us in this game, and it should be an easy win no matter what the weather.
I mean, the other big factor, it's the same factor every single week. And again, I have to pinch myself to think how brilliant our midfield is. But their two best midfielders are Shield and Zach Merritt. And, we've got, I'm not having a go at either player, but we've got 4 players ahead of them. Viney, Track, Oliver, I reckon even player maybe we've got 3 players ahead of them. That's a lot to have of their best midfielders. I'm not talking about, the general, the players who might come through the midfield, but, they can't hold a candle. Those 2 players can't hold a candle to our 2 best mids.
Yeah.
And forgetting Viney. So, that's a massive advantage.
Our mids are far more physical than what theirs are.
Exactly.
Merritt and Parrish and are great when the ball on the outside with the ball, but they're not grunt players, and we've got 2 or 3 grunt players in there that they won't be able to handle.
And just finally, the other thing is that I think what the club did really well is build really good systems in 2021 with the travel. We travel super well. And the whole idea of the sort of this gather round with a hub and them being in will suit Melbourne. We'll like it. We travel well. We love the Adelaide Oval. We played well there in 21 when in a similar, was it Essendon we played as well? In that year when we had to play a game.
No, in 2020 we played North there, I remember.
Yeah, 2020, and then in the finals in 21, we played the Lions there, of course. So we've got a good record at that ground, and I'm sure the team will be pretty keen to put the Bombers back in their box and to show them what a real team's going to do.
Where we won the toss and it's our home game. Sure, that'll have no effect whatsoever on the result. But we will be wearing
I didn't know
our
that. There you
home
go.
strip, I guess that means.
Right.
So, Essendon will be wearing their red.
Well, maybe we get the choice of the change rooms. Home teams should.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, cold showers for them, for the
Yeah.
Bombers. That's going to help our cause as well.
Do they still do that? Maybe at
Well.
those games that have been played at Norwood Oval and wherever
Yeah,
the
that's-
other games
yeah.
are, that'll be the case. All right. Well, it's been a long one, so I think we're going to leave it there. Thank you to Kieran from Canberra for his call in. Thank you to our voicemailer 3183D. Thank you to our Demonland posters who provided questions: El Diablo 14, Travi 14, Man, D. Lorian, Demonic Final Fantasy, Murdoch 516, RPFC, Denox, D for Life, D Me, Red and Blue, Make Purple, Engorged Onion, Bush Demon, Spa, Gonicus, Supreme Demon, Gaundy the Great, Bin Man, you two, Delightful Play, Lazy, D Old Fart, Oh My D's, Ross Millen, Red and Blue, Beard, Monocular, Graham Yates's Mullet, D Zephyr Youngblood, Demon 1234 2000, and Doug Reamer. If you want to ask a question for us to read out on the podcast, head over to demonland.com, post the question in the podcast thread that we open after every match. If you don't have an account on Demonland, which you really should, so it's a great excuse for you to sign up if you want to post a comment or post a question and that we'll read out. If you follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, you want to ask a question, just slide into our DMs, and don't worry, we don't have to use your real name. Leave a voicemail for us during the week on 0390163666. That's 0390163666. We'll play your question or comment on the air. Don't worry, you don't have to speak to a person. Nobody answers that phone. Don't forget to leave us a 5-star review with a comment, and we'll read that out on the show. Make it a poem, and we will really enjoy that. You don't have to, actually. Thank you to my co-host, B-Man and Georgia. Most importantly, thank you to you, the listener. We'll be back next week, possibly on Tuesday. I'll let you know during the week. Well, over the weekend, I'll let you know. After that, we'll resume back to our normal Monday night programming. Go Demons.
The Relegers.